After over 120 years, the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book has been given a new breath of life in an edition for Lyrebird music, which is the first since 1899 and which replaces the groundbreaking, though now out of date, work of John Alexander Fuller Maitland and his brother-in-law, William Barclay Squire. The manuscript contains 297 pieces that were written by 46 known composers during the Tudor and early Jacobean periods. This number includes such familiar names as William Byrd and John Ball, although we also have the more exotic-sounding Giovanni Picchi, and the completely unknown Chilean Oystermare. In addition, a number of pieces, some of which are quite familiar, are anonymously written. The Fitzwilliam Virginal Book was reputedly copied out by a Catholic recusant, Francis Tregian, during his incarceration in London's notorious debtors' prison, the Fleet. He'd been sent there in 1614 for failing to pay various creditors' debts that amounted to over £3,000, and it was in the same prison that he was to die in 1617. The prison was situated on what is, today, Farringdon Street. However, until the 1840s, this had been a river that fed the Thames at Blackfriars, less than a mile to the south. To all intents and purposes, it was a sewer outlet, and, from that perspective alone, life at the prison must have been unpleasant, if not intolerable. For most, though, it was much worse. The poorest inmates were forced to beg for alms outside the prison walls just to pay for their keep, and conditions were so harsh that few were ever able to leave the Fleet's confines alive. Intolerable for most, that is, except for those with means, and Tregian was one of them. He came from a landowning family in Cornwall, and was related to the Duke of Norfolk and the Earls of Derby and Leicester, and there can be few doubts that he was able to meet the cost of the small apartment he maintained within the prison walls. There, Tregian had time to pursue those things that interested him most. He had been described in his youth as very noble, of 20 years, a talented layman, knowledgeable in philosophy, music and Latin, and it is probable that these skills, learned during his education in France, and nurtured during his employment under Thomas Paget and, later, the Archduke of Brussels, occupied most of his time. The romantic ideal that Tregian copied out the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book during these years to pass away his sentence might well be true, although evidence suggests that at least a good portion was completed before he was incarcerated. In addition to this, though, he produced 3 other volumes of instrumental and vocal music and, together, they amount to over 1,200 pages. They are so tightly packed that the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book's 424 pages alone contain nearly 500,000 notes and rests. The manuscript takes its name from its last private owner, Richard Fitzwilliam, the 7th Viscount Fitzwilliam. He had owned it since 1783, when the Scottish music publisher, Richard Bremner, presented it to Fitzwilliam as a gift. Bremner had purchased the book for the tidy sum of 10 guineas at a sale of the library of its only other known owner, the German composer, Johann Christoph Pepusch, who died in 1752. Its name until the 19th century, though, had been Queen Elizabeth's Harpsichord Book, although her ownership may now be discounted, since some of its contents date from long after her death in 1603. The idea for the new edition came about when musicologist John Baxendale was asked to write program notes for the release of Jan Peter Belder's monumental recording of the complete Fitzwilliam cycle. To do so would require looking at the music in detail, but he found nothing in the 1899 edition that reflected the spirit of the pieces Francis Tregian would have known. It had been modernized to suit the standards of the day. Much of its original notation had been altered to such an extent that, while the music remained intact, important features that connect musicians of today with those of yesteryear were missing in their entirety. Armed with high-resolution photographs of the manuscript, Baxendale set about making a transcription. But it was not long before the enormity of the task began to dawn on him, and he contacted the renowned English music scholar, Francis Knights, who readily agreed to become its co-editor. Together, their task has taken 18 months of close collaboration. Transcribing the manuscript is one thing, and while obviously wrong notes are easy to correct, it contains so many ambiguities that hardly a piece went by without intense discussion. The approach Knights and Baxendale took was novel, their philosophy being that we should have an edition that is very close to the manuscript, as if it were a facsimile. This would help fulfill the needs of many who would prefer to play from the original. In the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book's case though, this would be difficult to say the least. It is written on 6-line staves using a variety of clefs. Notes are often poorly aligned, many are missing, clefs have been forgotten, and there are instances where both pieces and bars are incomplete. But the editors have striven to maintain as many aspects of the manuscript as possible by copying Tregian's notational idiosyncrasies. His beaming is retained, as is his quintessential means of tying notes, and the original time signatures and black notation have been faithfully reproduced. It is hoped that this will provide today's musicians a connection with the past, the music, and, even, with the composers themselves. The new edition is one of the most important of recent years. Its preface provides a much-needed look at the manuscript, its copyist style, its composers and the performance of their music, and a full critical commentary notes errors, makes suggestions where errors are suspected, and provides information on each individual piece. In 3 volumes of nearly 1,300 pages, we have the only known works of Giles Farnaby, a large repository of the music of John Bull and William Byrd, some of which is unknown elsewhere, and most of the known keyboard works of Peter Phillips. Indeed, had the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book not survived the ravages of time, we would know nothing of many of its composers, and many great pieces would have been lost forever. The edition is available exclusively from Lyrebird Music in both hardback and wirebound volumes.